Welcome back viewers, ladies, gentlemen, non-binaries and anyone with ears or other sound detection organs. Hope you enjoy. We are continuing with Going Native, written by Uncle Sealing. Going Native, Chapter 68. Askel made it about half a step into Jessica's apartment before arms shot out, grabbed him, and yanked him bodily inside. He let out a surprised yelp that turned into a long, drawn-out purr of pleasure as he found himself enveloped in Jessica's arms. "You shouldn't have done this for me." Her arms rubbed along his back and all the Helcom could do to reply was let out a little groan. "I don't know how I'm going to repay you." For just a moment, Askel was tempted to let this little deception go. Then he slipped his arms up and gently pushed to separate the pair. "I didn't pay for it. I don't even know how much it cost." He looked around at the now furnished apartment. The delivery people had placed each piece perfectly and now her space looked like a real home. The entire room was adorned with bright, pale wood and accented with dark steel. Stace had referred to the style as modern, then explained that it was at its peak about 60 Earth years ago, which made absolutely no sense. Jessica's face drained of color in panic. "Askel, I can't afford all this." "I don't." "It's okay. Stace paid for it." Jessica's confusion was plain, so he held up a hand and continued. "He figured out I was being really underpaid and decided to take me out on a shopping spree to make up for it. So, he just gave us this." Jessica swung her arm out to encompass all the new furniture. "Yep. Because you weren't being paid enough." "Yep. He even bought me a gecko." "So, your friend took you on a shopping spree to buy you anything you wanted, because he figured you were owed money for taking care of him." Jessica was smiling a little. "That is correct. And you took that opportunity to buy me an entire apartment worth of furniture." Her smile grew. "Yes. So you did get me all this." Her smile turned into a full-power grin. "I guess so." Now they were both grinning. "So now I'm going to sit you down on my fancy new couch and we are going to make out." Jessica nodded, as if this was the way this whole situation was supposed to go. "We are." Askel's heart was pounding in his chest, but he couldn't help the smile forming on his face. His entire body felt flush and tingly. His hands reached up, seemingly of their own accord, and touched Jessica's cheeks. Her skin felt like fire, smooth and hot, and as their lips met her warmth seemed to flow into him, Askel's whole body becoming a vessel for her love. The crunch of dirt felt pleasant under her feet as questing for great truths followed Stace down the hiking trail. She had wanted to break trail, stay in front and make sure it was safe, but considering how unsteady he looked, leaning on a walking stick, she figured it would be better to take the rear position so she could catch the human if he fell. Normally she'd use the opportunity to look at a guy's butt, but there wasn't a whole lot to work with there on Stace at the moment. Plus they were both wearing the exact same jeans and it felt strangely like looking at her own ass. Finally, they reached the summit of a small hill. A wooden bench, little more than a log cut flat on top, provided a spot to sit and take in the view. Stace plopped down on the bench on one side and questing for great truths decided that it was as much an invitation as she needed. She sat down to Stace's right and the two looked out at the mountains. It was a beautiful afternoon on this alien world, so much calmer than her home. She could probably learn to love this place. The hills, trees, and snow-capped mountains blended together into one breathtaking gestalt. Stace was breathing hard next to her, taking great gasps of air. "You okay?" Stace nodded. "Yeah, just not used to working this hard. First hike since I came back." "We can go back if you need to." "Nah. This is nice. Thank you for coming out with me." "Thank you for inviting me." A comfortable silence filled the air, the scent of spring growth on the wind. Stace let out a sigh, and with that questing for great truths knew it was time for whatever Stace had really invited her out for. I was hoping I could talk to you about your enhancements. Of course. Questing for great truths tried to make her voice as pleasant as possible. It was obvious that it pained the human to talk about it, but if he was going to make the effort she was going to help as best she could. You know about what happened at the bar in Denver. Of course she knew about it. She had watched the video, probably everyone at the facility had seen the security footage of Stace absolutely wrecking 3 terrorists. If he wasn't such a hermit, he would probably be the most popular person in sight. Yeah, I know. It was a bad time. When I was taking out those 2, you know. I almost missed. Stace's voice was sad, but there was an ember of anger smoldering there. I've been around guns my entire life. Less than 5 meters, and I almost shot the wall. It's understandable. In a stressful situation, shooting at another person, it's no wonder you'd have trouble. It wasn't that. It was this. Stace lifted his right arm and held it out in front of him. There was a slight tremble there, the muscles in the man's arm spasming and twitching. It wasn't much, and the skepticism questing for great truths was feeling much have been plain on her face because he reached onto his belt and unclipped a water bottle. Stace held the water bottle in right hand and once again lifted it into the air. The trembling was much more severe under load. I see. She held out her own mechanical arm next to Stace's. The difference was clear, her arm was steady as a rock. You know I'm not comfortable with this sort of thing. But my comfort is less important than my ability to protect my family. Stace popped the lid on his water bottle with his thumb and took a long sip. That's a very noble way of thinking about it. How does it feel? I mean, how do you feel? Questing for great truths turned in her seat slightly, then held out her left hand, palm up. Stace could see the silvered metal that made up her arm and the rubber-like pads on her palm and the tips of each finger. Stace took her hand carefully in both of his, feeling along the joints with his thumb, testing slight texture on the pads. The majority of my arm is a steel alloy, but you can see THOWW. She pulled her hand back and shook it, waiting for the pain to fade. Shit, I'm so sorry, I didn't think. You didn't think it would hurt if you shoved your thumbnail into my finger. For being a sickly guy, Stace had strong hands. I didn't think it could hurt at all. I am sorry. Stace's face was downturned in a frown, eyes downcast. I guess I know less than I thought. It's okay. Here. Questing for great truths held out her hand again and Stace took it carefully. Tell me how you think it works and I will tell you how off you are. Well, you try to move your arm and the arm just sort of moves when you tell it to. You can tell it to open and close your hand, maybe get a feel for how open or closed it is. Stace shrugged. I guess I just assumed it would feel something like my leg. Like nothing. She closed her hand, catching Stace's left in hers. He flinched, but didn't try to pull away as she squeezed and stroked his hand just as he had done hers. Come on, girl. Remember, this isn't flirting. It's helping a friend. I can see why you would think that. The pads on each finger have thermocouples and pressure transducers, and if I pull up the diagnostics I can see those values. I can tell you that your skin temperature is 32.4 C. But I don't have to do that. To me, your hand just feels warm and soft. Questing for great truths let go of Stace's hand. Thankfully, he wasn't looking at her face and couldn't see how flushed she felt. How exactly does that work? The same way I know where my arm is without having to know that my elbow is currently bent 24.8 degrees. There is a module that takes all of that data, all the pressure and temperature changes and angle data and the myriad other things, and converts it into nerve pulses similar to what a regular arm would put out. Sensory and kinesthesia emulation. I have proprioception and a real sense of touch. I can tell if a stove is hot by putting my hand over it and feeling the warmth without doing a temperature read. There are some differences, obviously. I don't really have a skin analog, especially on the length of my arm, so there's a lot less sensation there, but overall it's really very similar. Stace took her wrist and gently turned her arm. She letting him see the shifting plates of metal that exposed what must look like Silver's skeleton to him. The evening light reflected off the engravings on the steel radius and ulna. What do they say? I can't read that language. They are a memorial. My radius belonged to my great-grandmother, the ulna to my uncle. In this way, my family is always with me. She suddenly felt shy at having to explain it. I guess it's a dear child thing. I like it. Stace smiled and looked her in the face. For the first time, he didn't try to look away. All I have is this. He slid his finger into the neck of his shirt and pulled out a chain with 2 interlinked rings, one silver with gold and the other gold with silver. After a few moments of comfortable silence, Questing for Great Truths couldn't help asking. So, what's your plan for your arm? Fuck, I don't know. I have a few options. Stace started kicking idly at the ground, digging a little trench with the tip of his boot. Cloning is expensive and takes a long time. I could maybe afford it, but I would be tapped out afterwards. I could get new nerve tissue grown and grafted, but they'd have to flay my entire arm open. Lots of ugly scar tissue and it likely wouldn't be 100% effective. Maybe I should just get a prosthetic. Yours does look pretty cool. Plus it can do this. Questing for Great Truths flexed her wrist, letting the 20-centimeter blade hidden inside her arm pop free. Stace grinned. Yeah, I could have used that the other day. Is that a gear child thing too? More of a family thing. We always like to be prepared. The human nodded. I just don't know if I can bring myself to lose more of me. I already can't taste the cold. I just feel hollowed out on the inside. Can I make a suggestion? Of course. That's why I wanted to talk to you. Stace's Omnipod pinged as Questing for Great Truths sent him a picture. She watched him open it, seeing a picture of an arm brace that extended from shoulder all the way down to fingers. It was thin, looking almost like a shoulder-length glove with most of the material cut away. We use these sometimes when a kid is in the middle of a growth spurt or someone isn't healthy enough for surgical replacement. It uses the same nerve interface that a replacement arm would use, but acts as a sort of guide instead. You move your arm and the brace moves at the same time, acting on the same nerve impulses. If your arm moves but there weren't any nerve pulses, the brace provides some resistance to cancel out the movement. It can give you much better control while you consider your options. I would still need a nerve interface put in. Yep, but we can do better than just that. All of your new organs have sensors just like my fingers do. If we put in a proper sensory emulation module, you'd be able to feel your organs the same way I feel my arm. She put on her best smile. You could feel like you again, without having to wait and bankrupt yourself on cloned organs. She wasn't expecting the back-cracking hug that almost took her off the bench, but she was happy to have it. When Stace let go of her, the pair sat again in comfortable silence. After a few minutes, Stace pointed up at a dark speck wheeling in the sky. Look at that. Golden eagle, I think. It was a pretty bird, all browns and tans with a mean-looking hooked beak. Questing for Great Truths zoomed in with the array of lenses in her left eye, stabilized the image, and took a picture. With a smirk, she passed it over and Stace's pad chirped. Oh wow! Stace smiled as he looked at the picture. That's a great snapshot. Suddenly his face clouded with worry. What is it? Pom. My dog. Stace tapped the screen with his finger. She's perfect size for an eagle to swoop down and take off with her. I hadn't seen any up here yet. I figured our drones were keeping them away, but we're cutting down on the drone usage thanks to the cam balls. I think we should fix your eye. Stace jerked at the non sequitur, glancing up at Questing for Great Truths with an expression somewhere between curiosity and panic. What do you mean? I mean we should get rid of that dodgy Shilvati piece of shit prosthetic. Either get a cloned eye and go back to organic or upgrade to something a little more full-featured. A proper Gear Child prosthetic could look just like your old eye did, feel just like it, and let you do things like zoom in and see in a larger color range. The human began to shiver and Questing for Great Truths leaned towards him a little, tried to keep her voice soothing. It's okay, we're just talking. You're safe. What I mean is that you're stuck in this middle ground right now with what they put in you, where you have all the trade-offs with none of the benefits. At the very least, you should get the ability to see in the dark for your trouble. It's something to think about. It would be nice not freaking out every time I looked in the mirror. I'm still not completely used to having a black eye. Stace nodded and the shivering stopped. Thank you for the suggestion. Do you mind if I talk to you more about this in the future? I think I'm at my limit. Not at all. It's always a pleasure to spend time with you. Questing for Great Truths stood up, then reached down with her silver steel arm. After a moment's hesitation, Stace took her hand and let himself be pulled to his feet. Now let's start heading back. Samuel said you used to be a bartender and I think we could both really use a drink. Sammy groaned in frustration as they flipped through the paperwork for all of the temporary hires. It was going quickly, but they didn't want it to. The warning from Jelsai about a spy was more exciting than scary. The whole VCA project was above-board non-profit work. Having a spy snoop out the project only to find that it was exactly what it seemed was going to be great for the Painter Observatory. Even the investors agreed that continuing on the project was the right move when it was explained in that regard. They didn't have much interest in telescopes, but they did want their investment protected, and building a space telescope to give to the public was the sort of good publicity that came with its own kind of protection. This was great until Sammy learned that Jelsai had specific information to share. Mr. Seven was somewhere on the property, and he was one of the folks that made decisions about stuff like sending people to kill Sammy. The sort of person who provided weapons to assassins and had hit squads sent after Jessica because she liked a skill, and who didn't. He was adorable. That sort of person was not the sort of person that should be allowed around here. He was here, and he was a person that Sammy knew. A regular visitor with children. Sammy took the paperwork and stacked it into 2 piles. Of the 15 contractors, 9 were people who were on the observatory mailing list. They kept the 9 and sat the other 6 off to the side. Of the 9, Sammy could recognize 4 of them. They were somewhat local and liked to visit for some of their special events. The other 5 went off to the side. One of those 4 was a spy. They looked them over, then shuddered. It was obvious, but it was so sad. Sammy knew enough about how the world worked to know that it had to be the person they definitely didn't want it to be. Still, as they sent Commander REM the list of 4 contractors to keep a special eye on, Sammy had to wonder. Chandler Kane, what are you up to? End of chapter. If you enjoyed, like, subscribe, click the bell so you don't miss any episode and do all the other YouTube stuff. Visit and support the author, and I'll see you next time. If you didn't enjoy, comment on what I can do better. And as usual, have a wonderful day.